Hi, this is Scott with Crescent Soil Services. I wanted to take a minute to explain how to get accurate data from the soil testing procedures. The first important consideration is that you're testing sensibly. If plants are performing poorly in one section and performing better in another section, it would make sense to sample those separately. If you have two different areas that are performing differently and you combine those samples, you're going to be skewing both data sets, which will ultimately negatively affect the overall amendment procedure. You also want to be sampling consistently. In my opinion, you should be testing at least once per harvest cycle. In our professional work, we test twice per harvest cycle. If you haven't been testing consistently, then you won't know if your amendment applications are falling in line with the data set. You need to be able to track your soil over time to know that what you're doing is accurate and helping. And also, you want to sample regularly. Most people just sample periodically when they feel like it. You really want to try and sample at the same time in the harvest cycle and consistently from harvest cycle to harvest cycle. Most growers will wait till things are a total disaster before they even take a sample. If you do this, it makes it very difficult to make actionable advice to this data set. If you don't know what the soil looked like when it was performing well, the data set isn't going to make sense when it's not performing well. But if you've been testing consistently, you're also more likely to avoid those types of situations altogether. In my opinion, the bulk density is by far the most important data set because ultimately the lab is doing a weight by weight comparison. They're taking the weight in grams of element in that sample and comparing it to the weight of the soil in kilograms. They're also making the assumption, unless you tell them otherwise with the bulk density request, that your soil weighs 2 million pounds on a 6-inch acre slice. In my experience, this actually almost never happens, even with native soils. It's very common for potting soils or nursery mixes to have a bulk density as low as 0.1. Even the heaviest potting soils are somewhere around a 0.6. Most native soils are 1.5 or greater. This means that if you have a lightweight potting soil and the lab assumes that you have a 2 million pound per acre slice soil, your data is at least 10 times skewed, and your amendment applications are going to be 10 times over as well. I think this is one of the biggest problems with anybody trying to make actionable advice or sense of the soil testing procedure. Filling out the report is pretty straightforward. Fill your information as complete as possible and at least put your email address so that they can send the data to you. You also want to label your samples with your name so it makes it easy on the lab. It's also important to fill in how many samples you've submitted. If you're getting a bulk density value, then the sample depth is really irrelevant because they're not making that assumption. I feel the most valuable set of tests is the complete with extras. This test will give you the Malic 3 and the saturated paste test along with trace minerals and nitrogen. And again, by far the most important data point is the bulk density to anchor the values on the soil test. This will also help you with making very accurate amendment recommendations and making sure that you're correcting your soil in a positive fashion. I also feel that the data should always be reported in parts per million. 2 pounds per acre is the same as 1 part per million because it's 1 in a million. So if they're assuming that the soil is 2 million pounds, it takes 2 parts to make 1 part per million. And this just confuses the amendment application process and the math involved. Even calculating base saturation requires that your data is in parts per million. So you can save yourself a step and make it more sensible if you request the data in parts per million. If you get the complete plus extras test, you'll get these two reports. The gray and white report is the Malic 3, which uses a harsh acid extraction agent, which tells you the total nutrient pool in that soil. The saturated paste test uses deionized water, or if you want to be more advanced, send in your source water, and this will tell you what is currently water soluble and accessible to the roots. A lot of people in the cannabis space live and die by the saturated paste test, but I feel in a true living soil you really need to take care of the Malic 3 test as well. Especially if you're inoculating with biologically complete compost, the saturated paste test will change more rapidly. And if you're really ramping up biological populations, you're going to drain that total nutrient pool much faster. If you can only take one test, I would personally prefer to do the Malick 3 test to tell you what your total nutrient pool is. That's a consideration if you are also paying attention to biology. If you've enjoyed this video, hit the like button, and thanks for tuning in.